The morning I walked into that conference room, I was carrying a manila folder, a cold cup of coffee, and 3 years of silence I was finally ready to break. I didn't plan for any of it to go the way it did. I didn't plan to stop in the parking garage on the way up. I didn't plan to be 7 minutes late because I helped a stranger struggling with a heavy box near the elevator bank. And I definitely didn't plan for my brother's face to drain of every drop of color the moment that stranger walked in behind me. But let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the part that came before it. My father built Callaway Supply from nothing. That's not a figure of speech. He started with a secondhand truck, a storage unit in Decatur, Georgia, and a handshake agreement with 2 hardware stores that felt sorry for him. By the time I was in high school, Callaway Supply had 12 distribution contracts across the Southeast and a warehouse that employed 41 people. My father knew every single one of their names. He knew their kids' names. He brought a sheet cake to the warehouse every time someone had a birthday. My brother, who is 7 years older than me, joined the company right out of college. My father handed him the operations manager title like it was a gift, and my brother accepted it the way he accepted most things, as though it was already owed to him. I took a different path. I went to school for accounting, got my CPA license, and spent 4 years at a mid-sized firm in Atlanta before my father asked me to come in-house and manage the books. I said yes because I loved the company. I said yes because I loved my father. What I didn't say out loud, but knew in my bones, was that I also said yes because the numbers I'd been reviewing from the outside were starting to look strange to me. Inconsistencies I couldn't explain from a distance. Patterns I wanted to understand up close. My father had a stroke 14 months ago. He survived, but the stroke took most of the mobility on his left side and left him with serious cognitive fatigue. He tires easily. He gets confused when there's too much information at once. His doctors were clear that stress could trigger another event. My brother used that information the way a locksmith uses a key to get inside something that wasn't his. Within 3 weeks of my father coming home from the hospital, my brother had my father sign a limited power of attorney that gave him authority over all business decisions while my father recovered. I wasn't there when it was signed. I found out about it from my father's personal attorney, a woman named Patricia, who called me because she was concerned about the speed of it and the fact that my father had signed without her present. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. I didn't feel shocked. I felt confirmed. When you've been watching someone operate a certain way for years, you don't feel surprised when they finally do the thing you always suspected they were building toward. You just feel the specific exhaustion of having been right. I kept going to work. I kept doing my job. I kept my face neutral in every meeting and my voice even in every conversation. My father's friend had once told me something I wrote down in a journal. Never interrupt a person who is in the middle of demonstrating exactly who they are. I decided to take that advice seriously. Over the next 8 months, I documented everything. It started with the vendor accounts. My brother had renegotiated 3 of our supplier contracts, and the new payment terms didn't match what was in the system. I pulled the original agreements. I pulled the wire transfer records. I pulled the account statements. There was a gap money leaving the operating account in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger an automatic internal review. The amounts varied. The timing varied, but the destination didn't. It was always the same LLC, registered in Delaware, that I traced back through 3 layers of paperwork to a company my brother had formed 2 years earlier. He was invoicing Callaway Supply for consulting services through a shell company he owned. The invoices were real-looking. The services were not. I found 47 of them over a 22-month period. When I added them up, I sat very still for a long time. The total was $340,000. I kept working. I kept my face neutral. I made copies of everything and kept them in a fireproof lockbox at my apartment that was not on company property and not on company Wi-Fi. Then came the thing that broke something open inside me that I had been working very hard to keep closed. My mother passed away 6 years ago. She left a small collection of jewelry, nothing extravagant, but deeply personal. A pearl bracelet her own mother had given her. A garnet ring she wore every day until her hands started swelling from the medication. A thin gold chain with a small cross that she'd had since before I was born. My father kept it all in a velvet-lined box on the top shelf of his closet. He used to take it down and just hold the bracelet sometimes. I saw him do it once and he didn't see me watching, and I have never told anyone that. 8 months into my brother's tenure under the power of attorney, I went to my father's house to drop off some paperwork and help him with his physical therapy exercises the way I did every Tuesday. The velvet box was gone. I asked my father where it was. He looked confused, the way he sometimes does now, and said my brother had taken it for safekeeping. I called my brother. He said he'd moved it to a secure location because he was worried about the house being broken into. I asked where specifically. He said he'd get back to me. He never did. 3 weeks later, I drove past a consignment jewelry shop in Buckhead and saw my mother's pearl bracelet in the window. I know that bracelet the way I know my own face. I went inside and asked where it came from. The woman behind the counter said a man had sold it to them 6 weeks prior. She couldn't give me his name, but she showed me the description in their intake log. The seller had signed in as R. Calloway. My brother's name is Ryan. I bought the bracelet back for $240. I sat in my car in that parking lot and I did not cry. I am telling you that not because I'm proud of it, but because I need you to understand the kind of stillness that had settled into me by that point. I was done feeling things that didn't move me forward. Every emotion I had, I folded up and put directly into the file I was building. I contacted Patricia, my father's attorney, and told her what I had found. She listened without interrupting, which is something I have always respected about her. When I was finished, she said she knew a forensic accountant who worked with the Georgia Secretary of State's office on business fraud cases. She said she wanted to make a call. I told her to make it. 2 months later, I received a letter through Patricia's office informing me that a formal review of Callaway Supply's financial records had been initiated. I was asked to preserve all documentation and to say nothing to anyone inside the company. I said nothing. I went to work every day. I kept my face neutral. My brother, during this same period, had gotten increasingly aggressive about what he called restructuring. He sent me a memo, an actual memo, printed on company letterhead, informing me that my role was being redefined to a limited advisory capacity and that I would no longer have direct access to the operating accounts. He had already changed the passwords. I found out when I tried to log in on a Monday morning and got an access denied screen. Are you keeping track of all of this? Because I want you to understand that each of these things, the shell company, the jewelry, the locked out accounts, they weren't random. They were sequential. He was building a wall, brick by brick, and he believed I was just going to stand on the other side of it and accept the view. I submitted my response to the memo in writing. I said I understood, and that I looked forward to clarifying the scope of my role in our upcoming quarterly meeting. I CC'd Patricia. I BCC'd the forensic accountant's office. My brother read it and probably thought he had won something. The quarterly meeting was scheduled for a Thursday. The plan was simple. My brother, his personal attorney, Patricia, me, and a neutral party from a mediation service. The agenda, according to my brother, was to formalize the new structure of the company and, as he had told me on the phone the week before, to make things official regarding your reduced involvement going forward. He said this in a tone of voice that suggested he was doing me a favor. I drove to the building that morning, feeling the way I imagine people feel before they do something they have been preparing for quietly for a very long time. Not excited, not nervous, focused. The kind of focus that sits just below the surface and doesn't show on your face. The parking garage under the building has a slow elevator. I was early, so I took the stairs. On my way to the stairwell door, I passed a man near the elevator bank. He was older, I'd guess late 60s, with white hair and the kind of posture that suggests someone who used to stand very straight and hasn't quite stopped trying. He was carrying a large document box that was clearly heavier than it looked, and he had set it down on the ground and was trying to catch his breath. He had a lanyard around his neck with an ID badge facing inward, so I couldn't see what it said. I stopped. I asked if he needed help getting the box upstairs. He looked at me with an expression I can only describe as amused assessment, like he was deciding something, and then he said yes. He was going to the 14th floor, and he'd appreciate it very much. I picked up the box. It weighed about what a full case of paper weighs. We took the elevator together after all. He asked me what brought me to the building. I told him I had a meeting. He said he did too. I asked him what floor. He said 14. I smiled at that and said that was my floor as well. In the elevator, he asked me what kind of meeting. I said, a family business dispute. He nodded and looked at the elevator doors and said, those are the hardest kind. I agreed. Then I said something I hadn't planned to say, I said. But I've been ready for this one for a long time. He looked at me again with that same expression and said, I believe you. We stepped off the elevator together. The receptionist directed him toward the conference room at the end of the hall. The same conference room I was heading to. I thought that was a coincidence. I thought it until I opened the door and watched my brother's face go the color of old concrete. My brother had a very specific expression. It wasn't just surprise. It was the expression of someone who has been very careful to build something and has just realized, in a single instant, that they built it on top of something that was already there. The man with the document box set it down on the conference table and introduced himself. He was a senior investigator with the Georgia Secretary of State's Business Services Division, working in conjunction with the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit. He had been assigned to the Callaway supply case. He had been, as he explained very calmly to everyone in the room, intending to conduct an independent interview with me prior to the meeting when he ran into some trouble with the elevator. Patricia did not smile, but I could tell she wanted to. My brother's personal attorney immediately requested a recess. The investigator said that was fine and that he would be happy to wait. He sat down, opened his document box, and began reviewing what appeared to be a very organized collection of files. My brother sat next to his attorney and said nothing. He had the look of a man who has just realized that the quiet sister he spent years dismissing had been keeping receipts. Literally. I want to tell you what happened in the meeting, but first I want to tell you what happened in the 20 minutes of that recess, because that is the part that still sits with me. My brother found me in the hallway. He looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the expression he used when he wanted something and was recalibrating his approach to get it. He said, "I don't know what you think you've done, but you need to think about what this means for the family." He said, "Dad is going to be devastated." He said, "You're doing this out of spite because you've always resented me." I held my mother's pearl bracelet in my hand inside my coat pocket. I had carried it there since the day I bought it back. I looked at my brother and I said, very quietly, that I had found the bracelet. I said I had been to the shop in Buckhead. I said I knew he had sold it. He didn't say anything. I said, "I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing this because you stole from the company our father built, and you sold our mother's jewelry, and you locked me out of accounts I had a legal right to access." I said, "I documented all of it. I said it the way you say something when there's nothing left to argue about." He said, "You don't understand the pressure I've been under." I said, "I understand exactly the pressure you've been under. I watched it, I documented it, and I let you keep going because I needed you to show everyone who you were before I said a word." He didn't have anything to say to that. The recess ended. We went back into the conference room. What followed over the next 2 hours was not dramatic in the way television makes things dramatic. There was no shouting. There was no moment where someone slammed their hands on the table. It was quiet and procedural and methodical, and somehow that made it worse for my brother and better for me than anything theatrical could have been. The investigator walked through the documentation: 47 fraudulent invoices from the Delaware LLC, wire transfers totaling $340,000. A secondary set of books that my brother's personal accountant had been maintaining. The forensic team had subpoenaed those records 3 weeks earlier. There was also the matter of a real estate transaction my brother had pushed through under the power of attorney without my father's informed consent, which Patricia had flagged separately, and which had resulted in the near sale of a piece of commercial property my father had owned outright since 1998. My brother's attorney stopped the meeting twice to confer privately. The second time, he came back and said his client was prepared to cooperate fully in exchange for consideration on the charges. The investigator said that conversation would need to happen with the appropriate prosecutors and that this was not the venue for it. What I want to say about my father is this. Patricia had spoken to him the night before. He knew what the meeting was about. He had cried, she told me, and then he had been quiet for a long time, and then he had said, "Tell her I'm proud of her." Patricia told me that in a text message that morning, and I read it in my car before I went inside, and it was the only moment that whole day when I felt something crack open in my chest that wasn't anger. The power of attorney was revoked the following week. Patricia had already prepared the paperwork. My father signed it himself, at his kitchen table, with his right hand that still works exactly the way it always did. My brother was removed from all operating roles at Callaway Supply pending the outcome of the investigation. A compliance firm was brought in to audit the full 2-year period. The Delaware LLC was flagged for dissolution proceedings. The commercial property my brother had nearly sold? It stayed in the family. My father still owns it. He leases it to a flooring company now, and the income goes into a trust that Patricia helped us establish so that nothing like this can happen again, not during recovery, not during any future period when his capacity might be limited. My brother's personal attorney did eventually work out a cooperation agreement. There were other people involved, a vendor who had knowingly participated in the fake invoicing scheme, and a bookkeeper who had been pressured into maintaining the secondary records. The bookkeeper had kept her own copies of everything, quietly, for months. When I heard that, I recognized something in it. Some people, when they see what's happening, don't make noise. They just make records. Do I think my brother understood what he was doing when he started? I've thought about this a lot. I think he started with something small and told himself it was temporary and that he would pay it back. I think that is how a lot of things like this begin. A small decision that feels reversible. Then another one. Then the amount is too large to pretend it was an accident. So instead you build a story about why you deserved it, and then you build a structure to protect that story. And then the structure becomes the thing you're defending, not the money, not even yourself, just the architecture of the lie. I think about my mother's bracelet. I think about the fact that he sold it not because he needed $200, but because he needed to move through the world as if everything was his for the taking. That's different from greed. Greed wants more. What my brother had was something older and colder than greed. He wanted to be the one who decided what mattered and what didn't. She gave me that bracelet because she knew I would keep it. The company is still operating. 41 employees still have their jobs. My father's name is still on the building. Last month, one of the warehouse supervisors retired after 19 years, and my father video called in to the retirement lunch from his living room. He was in his chair with a blanket on his lap, and he gave a 6-minute speech from memory about this man's reliability and the time this man had driven through a thunderstorm to make sure a delivery got to a hospital supply depot. On time. Everyone in the warehouse was quiet while he talked. I was watching the video feed from my laptop and I had to mute myself for a moment. My brother is facing charges. The process is slow, the way legal processes are, but it is moving. Here's what I want to say to you directly, because I think some of you watching this have been in a situation where someone inside your own family treated something sacred like it had a price tag. Someone who looked at a thing that was built out of love and sacrifice and only saw what they could extract from it. If you are in that situation right now, I want to say something that I had to learn the hard way. Silence is not the same as acceptance. Documentation is not betrayal. Protecting what someone you love built is not disloyalty, it is the most loyal thing you can do. The investigator who I helped in the parking garage that morning sent me a brief note through Patricia's office afterward. It said, "Thank you for the help with the box, and for what you did for this case. It took a lot of patience." I wrote back and said, "I had a good teacher. I just never interrupted my brother while he was busy showing everyone exactly who he was. My father has the bracelet now. I gave it back to him. He held it for a long time without saying anything, and then he put it back in the velvet box, and he put the velvet box on the top shelf of his closet where it has always been and where it is going to stay."